Resident Evil is one of my favorite gaming series, and since it's very popular and successful, movies based on the franchise were a sure thing. So I thought it was a good idea to rank them. So let's get it started. Number 12, Resident Evil Netflix series. This series was a disappointment for me. The story was dull, and apart from nods and sprinkle here and there, not much reminded me of the games. The story focuses on the Wesker family, and to be honest, I wasn't really interested in the story. Everything was just bland and wasn't necessary to a Resident Evil adaptation in my eyes. The actors did a great job, but could not save this. This feels like an original project that would not sell and had to slap the Resident Evil brand on it to get it made. This series wasn't for me. Number 11, Resident Evil The Final Chapter. This one is my least favorite of the Alice saga created by Paul W.S. Anderson. The story is no longer related to the games. Claire, Redfield, and Wesker are back, but at this point, the characters are boring. They added a clone subplot, which is just not that interesting. In fact, it reminded me of The Sixth Day in a movie that was much better and more entertaining. Is there something redeemable about this? In my opinion, not really. It just feels flat and uninspired to me. The action is poorly filmed, shaky cam burns my eyeballs. Number 10, Resident Evil Afterlife. Straight up, this movie was not good in my eyes. It felt bland, generic, and low budget. But not in a fun low budget way. It just felt underwhelming for a Resident Evil movie. Don't ask me to explain the story. In fact, I'm not even sure there's an actual story. Feels like a bunch of random scenes together. Zombies have become mostly CGI. There are a bunch with makeup, but they turn out with tentacles out of their heads. It's pretty much a CGI fest and not a good one at that. Albert Wesker is the main villain, and he just feels like a cartoon version of the video game and the later games especially. Eve was already a cartoon style villain. They give us a bunch of characters that we don't even care about, so it leaves no weight to anything that happens on screen. And to be honest, the only thing on screen that was an attempt to make the movie 3D. But once that trend died out, the 2D movie became not as entertaining, and the 3D attempts stand out and kind of make this movie laughable. They bring back classic characters such as Claire and Chris Redfield. The actors do a great job, but they have nothing to work with. They're just there to relate to the games. At the end of the day, this is just not a good movie all around. I had some hopes since Paul W.S. Anderson came back to direct it, but it did nothing. It just feels like a step down. Number 9, Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. I don't think it's really terrible by any means, but as a big fan of the games, this is really disappointing. They nailed down the look of Resident Evil. The set pieces are pretty much faithful to the games. But to be honest, that's the only thing I like. The story is pretty much average. It mashes a lot from a few games, and maybe it was too much. It could have been more interesting if they focus on one game. This feels like a mess. Some of the characters are well done, and others, like Leon, were poorly written. Why did he have to be a comedy relief? Even if he was a rookie in the game, he was well respected, and you can see that through the lore. The look of the zombies are also disappointing. They look like they spent too much time in the pool. They feel cheap and uninspired. At the end of the day, I'll quote Obi-Wan Kenobi. This movie was the chosen one. It was supposed to bring balance to live-action Resident Evil movies, not leave it into darkness. Number 8, Resident Evil Infinite Darkness. It's not a bad series, it's more a movie split in 4. It's fun to see Claire back, and Leon is always in these animated movies. I guess he's the one of the most iconic characters, but I wish they would show more love to Jill Valentine. I'm sure they improved the quality of the animation since it first released, because I remember the animation didn't look as good. Number 7, Resident Evil Dead Generation. The first animated movie from 2008 is closer to the video games than the actual live action movies. It got a lot of things right, like the characters of Leon and Claire. They added a new location and followed the same rules as the game. It starts in a familiar location and end up in an underground lab and fights a giant monster with an eyeball on his shoulder. That's Resident Evil. It's decent. It breaks nothing new with this kind of movie. The CGI animation is very 2000s. It looks like a video game, but it was made 14 years ago. I can look past it. The main human villain is the classic and maybe cliche of the rich super villain. At the end of the day, this is a good attempt at adapting the franchise. Number 6, Resident Evil Extinction. The third movie in the franchise follows Apocalypse. There are a few returning characters like Carlos, and sadly Jill Valentine does not return. It doesn't pick up right after Apocalypse. Instead, we end up in a desert. Survivors turn into gangs, a little bit like The Walking Dead, but not done as well. And of course, we find Alice and discover she has clones. Wesker is part of the live action franchise, however, he is very underwhelming in this. He just sits at the table trying to be like Wesker from Resident Evil 5. The action is cool, but Alice has the Force now. She can lift rocks and stuff. And you can see the series is going a little over the top. It's not at the point where it's starting to be distracting, but it's going there. The movie has cool scenes involving trucks, which reminds me of Mad Max. I like they added Lyndon Ashby, Johnny Cage from the original Mortal Kombat. I was so happy to see him in this. Ali Larter plays Claire Redfield for the first time. She does a great job. But her character has almost nothing to do with the games, so it could have been easily completely a new character. The finale is cool. Finally, they put a classic tyrant as a final baddie. It was cool to see, but the creature does not match the nemesis from Apocalypse in my personal opinion. At the end of the day, it has less of that Resident Evil vibe, despite having some things that makes Resident Evil what it is. It feels more like a post-apocalyptic movie with zombies and a secret lab in it. Number 5, Resident Evil Retribution. While not being a great movie, it's still a fun and much better movie than the previous one, Resident Evil Afterlife. Alice is back doing more flips and stunts. Zombie clones everything that live action Resident Evil movies are known for. Still feels kind of cheap. The story is still a mess, but it's an entertaining mess. Alice as clones. They bring back the Umbrella Squad from the first movie. Nothing of this makes any sense, to be honest. And they bring back the original Umbrella Squad to use them as enemies and make it tied to the original movie. To be honest, even with them around, the original still stands out and feels like a completely different movie. The action is nice, the special effects are mostly CGI, but they are not that horrible, and they bring in new characters from the game, like Leon and Barry, who just look the part, to be honest. They could have been replaced with unknown characters, and it would have been the same thing. Ada is great, probably because she's one of my favorite characters in the game series. At the end of the day, it's not the best, but it's not the worst of the series. Number 4, Resident Evil Damnation. I found it a little better than Degeneration. The animation and CGI is still very 2000s. You know, in Chip and Dale, they mentioned the lifeless CGI. Well, that is actually what is happening here. Despite that, I had fun. It gave me Leon and Ada from the games, also Lickers, and a bunch of Mr. X's that end up fighting each other. The final fight is so freaking badass. I felt that the villain was a change of pace here, where he was evil but still had good inside of him. Very much like Darth Vader, it changes from the evil corporation. Number 3, the original Resident Evil live action movie. The first live action movie is either a hit or miss to fans of the series. The lack of characters from the games makes it feel kind of lackluster. However, I think the movie has the right vibes. It feels and looks like it belongs in Resident Evil. I would say from the start, I think it should have followed the formula of the games. You start in a familiar place like a house or mansion or train or village, and you slowly go to the secret lab. Instead, here they spend 10 minutes in the mansion and boom, right in the secret lab. It lacks that certain build up. The characters are interesting. We have the Umbrella team of soldiers who want to enter the lab to know why there was an outbreak. Michelle Rodriguez is a badass. The other characters have charm in their own special way. Then we have Alice, who starts the movie not remember anything. Personally, I find it interesting. It's a nice way to get exposition in the movie. The enemies are pretty much from the games, except one. The zombies are the main baddies. I find the design for the zombies really cool. It doesn't reinvent the wheel in terms of zombie design, but it gets the job done. The zombie dogs are amazing. There's something special about the zombie dogs. Then we have the liquor. The liquor is cool. The effects for the creature are pretty much outdated. The creature doesn't look horrible by any means, but did not age that well. The queen is pretty much an AI that was created to look like a little girl. She is quite menacing. I would say the story flows pretty well. The pacing is good in my opinion, and the movie goes on pretty fast. I would have taken more risk in some parts, like in one scene there's a soldier who has a likable personality. He stays behind to slow down the zombie herd. The scene implies that he takes his own life by cutting away to other characters, but they cut back right away to him who is still alive. Personally, I would not have cut back to him right away. I would have let the suspense run a little bit and make the audience believe he was not there anymore. Little touch like that would have made a better movie in my opinion, but the direction is still solid. First Resident Evil movie is a fun ride despite not having characters of the video games. Personally, I enjoy watching it. Number 2, Resident Evil Vendetta. This is one of my favorite animated movies from the series. This one stars Leon and Chris. They even brought back Rebecca Chambers for this, and I love to see characters that were forgotten. Now all we need is to see Billy. The animation is solid, the horror and action are solid as well. The story is interesting. The villain and his motivations are interesting as well. It's just an all-around great movie. Number 1, Resident Evil Apocalypse. The sequel of the original live-action movie took all the complaints of the original, especially missing characters from the games, and fixes that. Alice is still the main character, but now she has help from Jill Valentine and Carlos from Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. It is so cool to see Jill Valentine on screen. The actors who played them do a great job. We also have familiar characters like Mikhail who don't serve the same purpose compared to the game, but it's all good. Still a fun nod. The story follows a similar path to Resident Evil 3 where heroes needs to escape the city before the government blows it up. There is an interesting subplot with the character of the virus and his daughter. It adds a little bit of weight to the story. Unlike other video game-based movies, the added stuff felt like it fit in the story and not just become some sort of burden. The music is not as great as the original. It felt more of on a budget, maybe because it was not directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, but it's not terrible by any means. The zombies still look cool, once again nothing groundbreaking, but it still gets the job done. The Nemesis looks great, yeah it does look like a rubber suit, but I take that over any CGI any day, especially in the early 2000s. The action is where I have an issue. The movie is filmed with a bunch of jump cuts. Sometimes the fight scenes are harder to see. At the end of the day, this movie is very entertaining while not breaking new grounds. I want to know what is your list in the comments. If you like this video, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing,